Welcome to Markets Now. I'm Michelle Rook with Nick Tsiolis, Farmers Keeper, and grains to the plus side again this morning after kind of a mixed opening. And the livestock futures are trying to lean higher here, including cattle. Nick, we've had such a big run in the wheat market yesterday. It looked like maybe we had a bit of a reversal in the wheat market,
Yep.
but boy, we're back up here this morning, and this global production story just doesn't seem to die, does it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, cash levels in Russia are getting a lot higher, especially as we see India's demand's going to increase, and they've got their own problems domestically over there. But it's nice to have wheat lead that because we're back into really respectable levels there. And I think a lot of producers held off on pricing wheat when we were in that low $5 range. And so now seeing us come back up here to definitely nice, healthy, profitable levels with a lot of unsold wheat out there, it's benefiting the producer. So that's been great.
So what's happening with basis levels on wheat? Because we do have the harvest that's starting. I know at least HRW down in that Texas area. And are you guys making recommendations that producers start selling at these levels? Because you said they have been waiting. That's true.
Yep. So unlike what we're seeing with corn and beans year over year and month over month on basis levels, we are seeing wheat basis levels start to increase as there's scares out there about what the crop's going to look like in the Western plains right now. So definitely, if you're someone that is apprehensive to let go of some grain, there's plenty of things you can do to take these great prices. We're back above $7 now in the past few minutes, at least on the board, but there's plenty of things you can do to lock in that price and then leave yourself room for some upside or just mix in your sales. But you don't want to see that come crashing back either. It's one of those things where you just got to examine what percent sold you are, what levels you've been sold at already, and take some good opportunities here on wheat. So we're definitely a fan of rewarding the market whenever something like this happens.
Absolutely. And you and I have talked for a long time here over the winter about how short the funds were. They've gotten out of a lot of their short position, so does that take a little bit of the upside potential out of that market, or will it keep going?
Well, on one hand, it does, but we've seen that also just looking at corn, right? But when producer selling drags that down, we've seen less of a rally as we were used to when the funds were getting really, really long in the past couple of years. So there's a lot of different factors that can push that one way or the other. I'm just always a fan of keeping that simple and not overthinking that if we're talking about from the producer's perspective and just slowly rewarding the market and pitching in a little at a time.
No, that's some really good advice. And as we've talked, wheat has helped to pull the corn market higher, but does corn have its own story that's developing now, either between planting delays in the US or even the second crop safrinha corn in Brazil, maybe not being as big as they thought?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're talking to producers every day, especially in southern Indiana, where they've just gotten a lot less done. The state maps don't really show that when we look at that progress. And so that's certainly supportive. If I'm a producer, I want to be sitting there thinking about my individual farm and saying, okay, would I rather have a dry spring where we put everything in well, like we have the past few years, but then stay dry over the summer? Or am I glad to recharge some of those soil levels and potentially stay hotter and wet throughout the rest of the summer? That's going to depend on whether or not you've already put down nitrogen and anhydrous, where you're going to have to go put in corn on that ground no matter what, or if you're going to switch to beans. But we've just jumbled up the situation from the past few years of what could lead to those yield losses. Certainly every day that we go here, we're taking some off the top, but I still personally don't want to bet against, number one, the American farmer producing the best crop in the world, and number two, everything we've done with our growing practices and genetics out there, just like we saw with all these droughts in the past several years. So I think it's still too early to tell to say we're going to be so bullish that we're going back up to $7, because at the end of the day, whether it's Brazil taking 10% off the top, or the U.S. being slower in planting than we thought we should be over the past few years. Certainly, this is no 2019, but you've got to count your chickens and say, hey, the seasonal highs have hit for December corn between May and July, 17 out of the last 23 years. So we want to make sure we bite off a little bit here, leave ourselves some room for some upside, and not be caught holding the bag at harvest, which is actually a good thing because it makes the pricing cycle for your grain a lot more predictable when prices do go down at harvest because it's more obvious of when to sell. We haven't had those opportunities in the past few years.
No doubt. Corn demand, though, has improved, whether it's ethanol, exports. Even this morning, if you look at our year to date pace, we're up, what, 30% from a year ago?
Yep.
Do end users look right now like they are concerned, and what are basis levels doing?
Well, normally I would think that we're tracking on all of our basis data marginal to no changes over the entire corn belt for basis at harvest over the past month, as well as looking over the 2-year averages. What you've got to consider though too is we still have a lot of old crop out there, especially on corn, and so that's helping from the from the buy side of the cash markets. That's helping them hold off of increasing basis, looking at harvest because they've got more to buy there at this time of the year.
No doubt. What about the soybean market? We've been talking about China business maybe coming to us in that July, August delivery time period, some old crop beans. Now, China hasn't really bought anything new crop, but is that what's giving us this push here in the market, do you think?
Buy the rumor and sell the fact. We're also delayed. A lot of areas that haven't put in beans are going to see some wet weather. But producers have been working 18 and 20-hour days to get the crop in when we absolutely can. I'm more bullish, if anything, on corn than beans. I think there's a good chance when we look a month from now that some acres from corn drop down below the 90 million mark and that those go into beans. That plus, yeah, there's rumor out there of a sale to China, but it might be a case of too little, too late as well. We also are hearing out of Brazil that they're going to increase their acreage again next year. So it's setting us up for short-term bullish opportunities to sell and long-term probably still looking like our global stock situation is going to be the highest over the past 5 years.
And when we talk about short term as well, we're still kind of trading that southern Brazil flooding news, them
Yep.
having logistics issues, them having soy processors not able to really process. So that's all kind of working in here too, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, watch the closes, okay? Everybody, when you're looking at your cell phone in the morning of what prices are at, so we're up here 3 or 4 cents depending on the contract of beans. Let's see what happens on the closes because when we're in these type of trading ranges where we're up and then we're closing down, or we're down and then we're closing up, that's creating a lot of that volatility there. So it's showing that the market can't really make up its mind, especially as we reach some of these resistance levels of where the highs have been for the past month or anything like that.
Yeah, and that definitely has happened in soybeans here. We're right up into those chart areas again. One last question about this acreage discussion.
Yep.
Maybe we get a switch over, less corn, more soybeans because of the planting delays. Do we get some PP as well, you think?
That talk has already started, of course. It's too early to tell, really. There's some flooded out areas in different places. I've been talking to some crop insurance agents out there that say we're getting to the point in a lot of areas in the Midwest where we're going to start biting our nails and worrying. But it's funny. This is all anecdotal, but we talk to farmers in a bunch of different areas who sell grain through us, and the story tends to be, well, we're done planting and everything looks good, but man, my neighbors, I think people are really far behind. So it might be that psychological element of what's going on here. I'm just going to hold my breath for the next few weeks here to see how the weather patterns turn out and how much progress we get. We're probably not going to see as much progress this week as we did last week, coming up 21% more planted. But certainly we're not in a 2019 situation. It's not like the Dakotas haven't gotten into the field. They're actually looking pretty darn good so far this year. So we've got to see this maybe as a nice selling opportunity, and leave ourselves some room for the upside and not just sit there and be bullish that things are going to keep going that way.
So, advice for livestock producers on feed needs with all that in mind.
Well, so let's talk about globally first, and then we'll talk domestically. As wheat keeps coming up here, that creates a little more incentive on the side of corn, just relative to what those prices are at. So that's certainly going to help on the corn producer side. When we're looking at anybody who's got a cattle operation or selling into that market, that's going to help you with a year where we're kind of marginal on whether or not each individual farm is going to make a profit. The fact that you might be sitting on still respectable feeder and live cattle prices here, certainly live cattle's coming up due in part to feeder cattle hitting some new relatively recent highs. You're going to have the ability to hopefully buy cheaper corn and cheaper feedstocks and sell higher in the meats. So that's going to pad those guys a lot more. Out there in the western plains where a lot of the feeders are at, they're always living hand to mouth. So they're thinking more short term about their needs. Right now, they're relatively okay compared to the past couple of years. We've got more time to see what it's going to look like from that perspective, closer to harvest, depending on what happens with their crop out there and just their ability to source grain more locally versus railing it in or trucking it in from a lot farther.
All right, you bet. One last question for you. Things have improved on the river, haven't they?
Yep, absolutely. Unfortunately, they haven't recovered as much way on the other side of the river
Yeah.
in China to get more demand. Although corn sales were respectable last week for sure, but we're still, it's not the big draw yet. I think buyers and processors out there are still in that wait and see mode. And I like to follow what they're doing and what the funds are doing and following the smart money that way because they're not freaking out yet, spiking up basis that we're not going to have a crop and all these things. I tend to want to follow what they're doing if I'm thinking about pricing grain.
Okay, thanks for joining us. Good information. Nick Tsiolis with Farmers Keeper. That is Markets Now.
Thanks, Michelle.